Imagine you want to fight for your country. You love America. You want to serve. You walk into a recruiting office in 1940, ready to sign your life away to stop the Nazis. You look the recruiter in the eye and say, "I want to be a pilot." And the recruiter laughs in your face. He pulls out a report, an actual government study from the Army War College that says people with your skin color are mentally inferior. It says you don't have the reflexes to fly a plane. It says you don't have the courage to fight in the air. It says you were better off peeling potatoes or driving a truck, but you will never, ever sit in a cockpit. That sounds insane today, right? But that was the reality for every African American in 1940. The military was segregated. It was a white man's army. But a group of young men from colleges and towns across America refused to accept that lie. They knew they could fly. They knew they could fight. And they were willing to put up with humiliation, segregation, and impossible standards just to prove it. They were sent to a dusty airfield in Alabama called Tuskegee. The military expected them to fail. In fact, the whole program was designed to fail, a scientific experiment to prove once and for all that black men couldn't fly. But guess what? The experiment backfired. Instead of failing, they became the greatest fighter group in the history of the United States Air Force. They painted the tails of their planes bright red so the enemy would know exactly who was coming to kill them. This is the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. Welcome to Valor and Heritage. So, how did this experiment actually get off the ground? It started with pressure. The NAACP and black newspapers were pushing for a double V: victory abroad against fascism and victory at home against racism. They pressured President Roosevelt to open up the Air Corps. The Army grudgingly said yes, but they put impossible restrictions on it. They only accepted men with college degrees and perfect physical health, standards way higher than for white pilots. But the real turning point came from an unlikely source: the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. In 1941, she visited Tuskegee. The Secret Service was nervous. They didn't want her near these untested planes. But Eleanor saw a young black instructor pilot named Chief Alfred Anderson. She walked right up to him and said, "I've always heard that colored people couldn't fly. I'm going to find out." She climbed into the back of his tiny Piper Cub plane. The Secret Service agents were freaking out on the ground. Anderson took her up. They flew around for 40 minutes. She looked down at the Alabama countryside, totally calm. When they landed, she smiled and said, "Well, you can fly all right." A photo of her in that plane went around the world. It embarrassed the Army into finally giving the program real support. But a photo op wasn't enough. They needed a leader. Enter Benjamin O. Davis Jr. Davis was West Point royalty, but his time at the academy was a nightmare. For 4 years, no cadet spoke to him unless it was official business. He ate alone. He roomed alone. He was silenced because of his race. But he didn't quit. He graduated near the top of his class. When he got to Tuskegee, he was the commander. He was strict. He was tough. He told his men, if you mess up, they won't just blame you. They will blame the entire race. We have to be perfect. He made them polish their boots until they were mirrors. He made them march until they dropped. He knew that the only way to beat the prejudice was to be so good that nobody could deny it. The training was brutal. They started in simple biplanes, then moved to the AT-6 Texan trainer, and finally the P-40 Warhawk. These were fast, dangerous machines. Many cadets washed out. Some crashed and died. But a core group survived. They became the 99th Pursuit Squadron. They were ready for war. But the Army still didn't want to send them. They sat in Alabama for months, bored and frustrated, while the war raged in Europe. Finally, in 1943, the order came. They were going to North Africa. When they got to North Africa and Italy, the white commanders didn't know what to do with them. They gave them old, beat-up planes. P-39 Airacobras and P-40s. They assigned them to patrol empty coastline where no Germans ever went. It was an insult. They were being treated like glorified security guards. But the German Luftwaffe didn't care about the color of their skin. They just saw targets. On their first real mission near Pantelleria, the Tuskegee Airmen ran into a swarm of German fighters, and they fought like demons. Lieutenant Charles Hall shot down a Focke-Wulf 190. It was the first aerial victory by an African American. The ice was broken. Seeing their skill, the Army finally upgraded them. They gave them the Cadillac of the skies, the P-51 Mustang. This was the best fighter plane of the war. Fast, long range, and deadly. To set themselves apart, the mechanics painted the entire tail section of the planes a bright crimson red. The Red Tails were born. Their mission changed, too. They weren't just patrolling anymore. They were assigned to escort heavy bombers, B-17s and B-24s, deep into Germany to bomb factories and oil refineries. This was the most dangerous job in the Air Force. The bombers were slow sitting ducks. The German fighters would wait for the escorts to get distracted chasing glory, and then they would slaughter the bombers. Benjamin O. Davis Jr. gave his men a strict order: stay with the bombers. He told them, "I don't care if you shoot down 0 German planes. If you leave the bombers to chase a kill, I will court-martial you myself." Most fighter pilots wanted to be aces. They wanted to rack up kills. But the Red Tails accepted the discipline. They flew close cover. They wove in and out of the bomber formations like sheepdogs protecting the flock. The white bomber crews noticed. They didn't know who was flying the Red Tail planes at first. They just knew that when the Red Tails were around, they didn't get shot down. They started calling them the Red Tail Angels. There's a story of a bomber pilot looking over his wing, seeing the red tail and saying over the radio, "Thank God it's the Angels." He didn't know the pilot was black. He didn't care. He just knew he was going home alive. We are flying into the heart of Nazi Germany. The Red Tails are about to face a weapon they have never seen before: a jet engine. But before the dogfight starts, I need you to be my wingman. If you believe these heroes deserve to be remembered, lock on to that subscribe button and fire away. We are preserving history one story at a time. Join the squadron. Now, check your 6. Here come the jets. By 1944, the Germans were desperate. They introduced a secret weapon, the Messerschmitt Me 262. It was the world's first jet fighter. It had no propeller. It flew at 540 miles per hour, way faster than the P-51 Mustang. It was like fighting a Ferrari with a Ford truck. The Allied pilots were terrified. The jets would scream in, blast a bomber with cannons, and zoom away before anyone could catch them. But on March 24, 1945, the Red Tails were escorting bombers to Berlin. It was the longest mission of the war, 1,600 miles round trip. Suddenly, the jets appeared. Most pilots would panic, but the Tuskegee Airmen had learned to use their plane's agility against the jet's speed. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown saw a jet coming up behind the bombers. He couldn't catch it in a straight line, so he dived under the bomber formation, pulled up into a steep climb, and caught the jet in his sights as it zoomed past. He fired. The jet exploded. It was one of the first times in history a propeller plane shot down a jet. On that same mission, 2 other Red Tails, Earl Lane and Charles Hayward, also shot down jets. They proved that it wasn't the machine that mattered. It was the man in the cockpit. The inferior pilots had just destroyed Hitler's superior technology. By the end of the war, the Red Tails had flown 15,000 sorties. They destroyed over 260 enemy aircraft. They earned 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses.
And the most famous stat of all? For decades, it was said they never lost a bomber. Now, historians have looked at the records, and it turns out they did lose a very small number, about 25 out of thousands of missions. But compare that to other groups who lost hundreds. Their record was nearly perfect. It was statistically miraculous. You would think after saving hundreds of American lives and destroying the Luftwaffe, these men would come home to a hero's welcome. Parades, keys to the city? Nope. As soon as they stepped off the transport ships in New York and Boston, they were told to go to the colored waiting room. German prisoners of war were being treated better in American camps than the black men who fought them. Some of them were beaten for wearing their officer uniforms in the South. Some couldn't get jobs flying commercial airlines. It was a slap in the face, but their excellence could not be hidden. The military knew what they had done. Their record was undeniable. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, desegregating the U.S. military. Why? Because men like Benjamin O. Davis Jr. and the Red Tails proved that segregation was not only morally wrong, it was militarily stupid. You don't bench your star players. Benjamin O. Davis Jr. went on to become the first black general in the Air Force. Another Tuskegee Airman, Daniel Chappie James, became the first black four-star general. They laid the foundation for every pilot of color who came after them. Today, if you go to an air show, you might see a restored P-51 with a red tail. When it flies by, people don't just see a cool plane. They see a symbol of excellence. They see the promise of America that talent and courage matter more than where you come from or what you look like. They fought for the right to fight. And in doing so, they taught America how to fly. If you think the Red Tails are the ultimate sky warriors, leave a comment, Red Tail Angels. Next time on Valor and Heritage, we're telling a story so secret it was classified for 50 years. We're meeting the Ghost Army, the artists, actors, and sound engineers who used inflatable tanks to trick Hitler. Yes, you heard that right, inflatable tanks. I'm Baylor. Keep climbing.